Imagine you're a child. In front of you lies a dark forest. You don't know what awaits you, but you feel that tingling sensation, a thirst for adventure. You step inside. The wind rustles through the trees. Somewhere a cricket chirps. Every step takes you deeper into the unknown. That was exactly the feeling Shigeru Miyamoto had as a child when he wandered through the woods near his parents' home in Kyoto. Decades later, he transformed that feeling into a video game that would change the world. But why is this game, which was released in 1986, still relevant today? Why has it captivated millions of players over the decades? To understand that, we need to look at the story of its creator and the philosophy behind Zelda. Shigeru Miyamoto was born in 1952 in the small town of Sonobe, not far from Kyoto. By the way, if you want to visit Sonobe today, you need to look for a city called Nantan. On January 1st, 2006, Sonobe, along with the towns of Hiyoshi, Yagi, and Miyam, was merged to create the city of Nantan. Unlike many children of his time, he didn't have a TV or a cinema nearby. But he had something else: nature. As a child, he loved exploring his surroundings. One memory in particular stayed with him for life. Once he discovered a small cave at the foot of a hill. Curious but also a little scared, he got himself a lantern and ventured inside. The passage grew darker. The echo of his footsteps reverberated until he finally emerged on the other side. This experience felt like a real adventure to him. The mix of curiosity, fear, and the reward of discovering something new. That's exactly what would later define Zelda. So, his inspiration for Zelda didn't come from a book or a movie, but from his own childhood experiences. And that was the key to his success as a game designer. Miyamoto didn't want to tell stories. He wanted to create experiences. While other games of the 1980s often focused on high scores or linear levels, Zelda prioritized freedom. You can go anywhere, but you have to figure out what happens on your own. But how did this idea eventually become a game? That's what we'll explore in the next section. The early 1980s were an exciting time for Nintendo. While Super Mario Bros. Was set to revolutionize the platforming world, Miyamoto was simultaneously working on a completely different concept. A game that didn't just feel like a jump and run, but like a true adventure. The Legend of Zelda. The core idea. A game that isn't linear. A world that players have to discover on their own. Secrets, puzzles, and its own mythology. But this was a massive challenge. Problem number 1, the technology. The Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, had limited memory. It had only 2 kilobytes of RAM and 32 kilobytes of ROM for game code and data, which was extremely restrictive by today's standards. Just for comparison, most smartphones today have 8 gigabytes of RAM. That's 4,194,304 times larger than the NES's 2 kilobytes of RAM. But how do you create a vast world when you only have a few kilobytes to work with? This limitation forced the developers, including Shigeru Miyamoto and his team, to come up with creative solutions to fit the expansive world of Zelda into such a small memory footprint. World design. The overworld and dungeons had to be broken into smaller sections, or screens, that could be loaded individually. This allowed the game to manage memory efficiently by only loading the necessary data for the current screen. Enemy and item data. The number of enemies, items, and interactive objects on a single screen had to be carefully managed to avoid exceeding memory limits. This is why you often see only a few enemies on screen at a time. Compression techniques. The developers used clever programming tricks and data compression to store more information in less space. For example, they reused tiles and sprites in creative ways to represent different objects without needing additional memory. These ingenious solutions allowed The Legend of Zelda to feel vast and immersive, despite the hardware limitations. But technical hurdles weren't the only challenge. Problem number 2. Players weren't used to thinking for themselves. Up until then, most games clearly told players what to do. But Miyamoto wanted players to feel lost, just like he did back in the forests of Kyoto. To help players adapt to this new style of gameplay, the game included subtle design elements to guide them without breaking the sense of freedom. Environmental clues. The world was designed with visual hints to nudge players in the right direction. For example, unusual trees, rocks, or pathways often hinted at secrets or important locations. NPC hints. Characters in the game, like the old man in the cave, provided cryptic advice that encouraged players to think critically about their next steps. Progressive difficulty. The first dungeon was relatively easy to find, and the game gradually introduced more complex challenges as players became more familiar with the mechanics. Encouragement to experiment. The game rewarded players for trying new things, like burning bushes, bombing walls, or pushing blocks, which taught them to think creatively. By doing this, The Legend of Zelda didn't just offer a game, it created an experience where every discovery felt earned. And that's what made it so special. But even with these innovations, there was one more challenge to overcome. Problem number 3. The story had to be simple, yet mystical. Miyamoto didn't want long dialogues or cutscenes. The world of Zelda had to tell its story as you explored it. To create a mystical and engaging story without relying on traditional storytelling methods, Miyamoto and his team used several unique techniques. Environmental storytelling. The world itself told the story. Ruins, hidden caves, and strange landmarks hinted at a larger history and deep lore. For example, the presence of Ganon's minions and the Triforce symbol suggested a mythical conflict unfolding behind the scenes. Cryptic NPC dialogue. Characters in the game often spoke in short, cryptic phrases that hinted at secrets or deeper meanings. For example, the old man in the cave saying, "It's dangerous to go alone, take this," became iconic, adding to the game's mysterious tone. Player imagination. By keeping the story minimal, Miyamoto left room for players to use their imagination to fill in the gaps. This made the world feel larger and more personal, as players could interpret the story in their own way. Symbolism and atmosphere. The game's use of symbols, like the Triforce, and its atmospheric music, composed by Koji Kondo, added to the sense of mystery and grandeur. Through these elements, The Legend of Zelda didn't just tell a story, it made players feel like they were discovering one for themselves. When The Legend of Zelda was released in Japan in 1986, it was nothing short of a revolution. It was also one of the first NES games to feature a save system, made possible by a battery-backed memory chip inside the cartridge. At the time, this was a groundbreaking innovation, allowing players to save their progress in a vast, non-linear world, something that had been nearly impossible with the NES's limited hardware. And then, something happened that even Nintendo didn't expect. Zelda became a massive success. Upon its release in Japan, The Legend of Zelda reportedly sold 1 million copies on its first day, and went on to sell a total of 1.69 million in Japan. Wait a moment. 1 million copies on day one. That sounds like a lot, especially for 1986. During my research, I encountered a little problem. Looks like Wikipedia has some misinformation. "1 million copies sold in just one day? At least that's what Wikipedia claims. A massive success if you believe the number. After all, Zelda would have secured almost 60% of its total sales on day one, and only sold around 690,000 additional units in the years that followed. Sounds strange? It is. So I did some digging. And what I found, once again, shows just how quickly false information can establish itself as fact. The trail leads to a British magazine. Wikipedia cites a magazine called The Games Machine as its source. On page 148, it supposedly states that Zelda sold 1 million copies on its first day. The first problem. The article is actually on page 145, not 148. The second problem. The statement doesn't come from Nintendo Japan, but from someone named Mike Wensman. Wensman, a Nintendo representative from the UK, claims the following in the article. In Japan, he claims, Legend of Zelda sold a mind-boggling million copies on its first day of release, and it does provide 260 hours of play. 1 million sales in a single day? 260 hours of gameplay? Well, let's start with the gameplay time. According to How Long to Beat, it takes about 9.5 hours to complete Zelda. So 260 hours is optimistic. My grandmother could probably finish the game in under 260 hours, and she's never played a video game in her life. But let's move on to the bigger issue. How likely is it that 1 million people in Japan went out to buy Zelda on its first day? Let's break this down. First, there were no digital purchases back then. Every buyer had to physically go to a store. Second, Zelda was a new brand. It wasn't an established franchise. There were no sequels, and no one knew if it would be a hit. Third, the game only ran on the Famicom Disk System, an additional piece of hardware that not everyone in Japan owned. In short, the claim that 1 million Japanese people blindly bought the game on its first day sounds unlikely. And then there's the biggest contradiction of all. If Zelda sold 1 million copies on its first day, then why did it only sell 1.69 million copies in total? That would mean almost no one bought the game after its release, a completely absurd idea. How do such misinformation arise? First, a PR person throws out an impressive number. Then, a magazine prints it without questioning it. Next, Wikipedia picks it up as fact. And suddenly, it's cited everywhere. Just like that, an unverified statement becomes a so-called historical fact. The truth? Zelda was a massive success, but not overnight. Nearly 40 years after its release, The Legend of Zelda is more than just a classic. It's one of the most influential game series of all time. But why? The philosophy of Zelda is timeless. Shigeru Miyamoto didn't just want to make a game that entertained. He wanted to create a feeling, the joy of exploration, the sense of adventure when discovering something new, the reward of figuring out a solution on your own. These principles are just as exciting today as they were in 1986. For example, Breath of the Wild, 2017. Nintendo could have simply made a modern Zelda in the style of Ocarina of Time. But instead, they went back to the roots. An open world you can explore at your own pace. Secrets that aren't marked. You have to find them yourself. No strict order, you can even go straight to the final boss. Go where you want. Experiment. Find your own path. That was revolutionary in 1986, and still is today. Zelda inspires the entire gaming world. Without The Legend of Zelda, many of today's open-world games simply wouldn't exist. Elden Ring, for example, drew inspiration from the open world of Breath of the Wild, giving players as much freedom as possible to explore, discover, and forge their own path. Every generation grows up with Zelda. From the 80s to today, every new console generation has had its own Zelda. Ocarina of Time, released in 1998, was one of the first true 3D adventure games. The Wind Waker, released 2002, proved that a great art style can be nearly timeless. Breath of the Wild showed that open worlds without checklists feel far more immersive. Zelda constantly reinvents itself, yet it always remains Zelda. And that's what makes it timeless. The Legend of Zelda isn't just a game, it's a feeling. A feeling of adventure, of discovery, of freedom. What Shigeru Miyamoto felt as a child, wandering the forests of Kyoto, is something we still experience today, when we journey through Hyrule with Link. And that's exactly what makes Zelda timeless. It doesn't force us to play it, it invites us to explore it. It doesn't give us fixed solutions. It lets us experiment. And whether we're 8 or 80 years old, it always feels like an adventure. That's why Zelda won't disappear in the decades to come. As long as there are people who are curious and want to uncover secrets, there will always be Zelda. One more thing. This is the first time I've made a video like this, a documentary instead of a regular video. And I have to say, it took a lot of time and effort, but it was also really fun. So I'd love to hear your feedback. What did you like? What could I improve? And if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.